The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the bustling city of Crestwood. Dr. Elijah Carter, a 28-year-old surgical prodigy, stood on the balcony of his modest apartment, savoring the quiet moment. He had just completed a grueling 12-hour shift at Crestwood General Hospital, where he was widely regarded as one of the most promising young doctors in the city. His colleagues admired his skill, his patients trusted his care, and his future seemed brighter than the stars above. But little did Elijah know, his life was about to be turned upside down by a force far beyond his control, a force fueled by prejudice, power, and injustice. Elijah Carter was no stranger to adversity. Born into a working-class family in a predominantly black neighborhood, he had fought tooth and nail to achieve his dreams. His mother, a nurse, instilled in him a passion for medicine, while his father, a factory worker, taught him the value of perseverance. Despite the odds stacked against him, Elijah excelled in school, earning a full scholarship to one of the nation's top medical schools. By the time he joined Crestwood General, Elijah had already made a name for himself. His groundbreaking research on minimally invasive surgical techniques had been published in prestigious medical journals, and his bedside manner was the stuff of legend. Patients often remarked that Dr. Carter had a way of making them feel seen, heard, and cared for. A rarity in the fast-paced world of modern medicine, but not everyone was impressed by Elijah's success. It was a crisp autumn evening when everything changed. Elijah had just finished dinner at a local diner when he noticed a commotion outside. A young woman was being harassed by a group of men, their voices slurred with alcohol. Without a second thought, Elijah rushed to her aid, intervening before the situation could escalate. What happened next was a blur. The men turned on Elijah, hurling racial slurs and threats. A fight broke out, and by the time the police arrived, Elijah was kneeling beside one of the men who had fallen and hit his head during the scuffle. Despite Elijah's attempts to explain that he was trying to help, the officers immediately assumed the worst. "You're under arrest," one of them barked, slapping handcuffs on Elijah's wrists. The trial was a farce from the very beginning. The prosecution painted Elijah as a violent thug, using his race and background as evidence of his supposed guilt. The media sensationalized the case, with headlines like "Doctor" or "Delinquent" splashed across the front pages. The judge presiding over the case, the Honorable Richard Blackwell, was a man known for his blatant racism and harsh sentencing. Despite a lack of concrete evidence, Judge Blackwell allowed the prosecution to present a biased and inflammatory case. Elijah's defense attorney fought valiantly, but it was no use. The jury, swayed by prejudice and fear, delivered a guilty verdict. Elijah was sentenced to 5 years in prison, his medical license revoked, and his reputation destroyed. As he was led away in chains, he couldn't help but feel a searing sense of injustice. How could this happen? How could his life's work be erased in an instant? Prison was a nightmare. Elijah, once respected and admired, was now just another inmate in a sea of broken dreams. The other prisoners quickly learned of his background, and some resented him for it. He was constantly targeted, both physically and emotionally, but he refused to let the system break him. During his time in prison, Elijah found solace in books and correspondence. He wrote letters to his family, his friends, and even to organizations advocating for criminal justice reform. He studied tirelessly, keeping his medical knowledge sharp despite being barred from practicing. He also mentored fellow inmates, teaching them about health and wellness and helping them prepare for life after prison. But no matter how hard he tried to stay positive, the weight of his wrongful conviction hung over him like a dark cloud. He often wondered if he would ever get his life back. After serving 3 years of his sentence, Elijah's case caught the attention of a nonprofit organization dedicated to exonerating wrongfully convicted individuals. With their help, new evidence came to light. Security camera footage from the diner that clearly showed Elijah trying to de-escalate the situation. The footage, combined with testimony from the young woman he had helped, proved his innocence beyond a shadow of a doubt. Elijah's conviction was overturned, and he was released from prison. But while his freedom was restored, his life was far from whole. His medical license was still suspended, and the stigma of his conviction followed him everywhere he went. Many hospitals refused to hire him, and those that did offered him menial positions far beneath his skill level. But Elijah refused to give up. He knew he had a purpose, and he was determined to fulfill it. After months of fighting, Elijah finally regained his medical license. He took a job at a small, underfunded clinic in a low-income neighborhood, where he dedicated himself to serving those who had been forgotten by society. His patients adored him, and his colleagues respected him, but he still carried the scars of his past. Meanwhile, Judge Richard Blackwell continued to wield his power with impunity. Over the years, he had become even more emboldened, his rulings growing harsher and more biased. But karma has a way of catching up with everyone, and Blackwell was no exception. One fateful day, Judge Blackwell was rushed to Crestwood General Hospital after suffering a massive heart attack. The situation was dire. He needed a complex, high-risk surgery, and only one doctor in the city had the skill to perform it. Dr. Elijah Carter. When Elijah received the call, he was stunned. The man who had destroyed his life was now lying on an operating table, his fate in Elijah's hands. For a moment, he was tempted to refuse. Why should he help someone who had shown him no mercy? But then, he remembered the oath he had taken as a doctor: to do no harm, to save lives regardless of who they were. With a heavy heart, Elijah agreed to perform the surgery. The operating room was tense as Elijah scrubbed in. The nurses and assistants exchanged nervous glances, aware of the history between the doctor and his patient. But Elijah remained focused, his hands steady and his mind clear. The surgery lasted for hours, every second a test of Elijah's skill and resolve. Finally, as the sun began to rise, he closed the incision and stepped back. The surgery was a success. Judge Blackwell would live. When Judge Blackwell regained consciousness, he was informed of the man who had saved his life. Shame washed over him as he realized the magnitude of what had happened. He requested to speak with Elijah, but the doctor declined. For Elijah, this wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was about staying true to his principles and proving that he was the bigger person. News of the surgery spread quickly, and the media hailed Elijah as a hero. Offers poured in from prestigious hospitals and research institutions, but Elijah chose to stay at the clinic where he felt he was needed most. As for Judge Blackwell, the experience changed him. He retired from the bench and dedicated the rest of his life to advocating for criminal justice reform, using his platform to right the wrongs he had committed. Years later, Elijah stood on the same balcony where his journey had begun, gazing at the stars. He had rebuilt his life, one step at a time, and though the scars of his past would never fully fade, he had found peace. He knew that his story was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful about the future. Fate had tested him, broken him, and ultimately redeemed him. And through it all, he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to make a difference in the world. This expanded version of the story delves deeper into the characters, their motivations, and the emotional journey they undertake. It highlights themes of resilience, justice, and the power of redemption, making for a compelling and thought-provoking narrative.